Deck building can be really difficult sometimes because figuring out the perfect ratios and techs isn't for everyone. And this is why YouTube can be a really good resource. Especially my videos, I'm saying. But yeah, it's always nice to hear other people's perspectives on certain cards to help us figure out what to play in a given format. And although I can't necessarily tell you what to play exactly for perfect results, I can at least give you generic pointers. So why don't we start with the best must-play staples for this format? As soon as, you smash the like button, and the subscribe button too, of course, because otherwise it's gonna get jealous. Anyways, let's start off with the obvious ones. Hand traps that can generically be played like Ash, Imperm, and Nibiru must be in your main deck. They not only allow you to cover a lot of ground because some of them are generic, but also very high impact for the most part. I mean, Ash is high impact against the Chimera deck, and then Imperm is usually just pretty good against almost everyone, and Nibiru is really high impact against Unchained and decks that play into it. And you'll never have two of these hand traps dead against a certain matchup. But yeah, if you have the choice between Imperm and Valor, you're obviously trying to main deck and prioritize Imperm over the Valor because at least it doesn't lose to Cobb at the Grave and triple tactic talents. And also you can use it outside of the main phase and you can draw it for turn. Because Valor loses to all those things. Yeah, that's kinda garbage. And Nibiru is the riskiest, but also the juiciest when it resolves. In this format though, you absolutely have to take risk because if you're not, you're going to be losing game 1 against combo decks, and if you do lose game 1, you will also probably lose game 3. Initially though, the hand trap that was replacing Nibiru was Drool, but because of Unchained, things are now changing. With that said, Drool should probably still be in your side deck if you don't really have anything else for combo. Like, drawing Drool is actually much better than drawing, let's say, 2 low impact hand traps like Valor against a deck like Mana Dome. But sometimes drawing Drool can be a complete neg 1 if you're using it generically because it does nothing against trap decks and Unchained. And that's the reason why you can't simultaneously main deck Drool and Nibiru because you might dead draw like crazy. The goal is to play hand traps with a lot of overlap and preferably dedicate at least 6 cards per matchup. If you have, let's say, 9 side deck cards for one matchup and then only 3 for another, you're kind of like unbalanced. And coming back to Drool, let's say that the decks that lose to Drool also lose to other hand traps like DD Crow, Ghost Bell, and Bestials, and you need more flexibility. You can actually just straight up replace Drool with these hand traps because at least they cover other ground like, hitting the Labyrinth cards, for example. So sometimes you want to aim reliability and versatility over power. Not always though, because sometimes you specifically need an extremely powerful out in order to clear something annoying that your opponent deck can do. So for example, Purely and their Ex Purely Noir can be extremely annoying, and if unprepared, you will definitely lose to that. But this is the beauty of Book of Moon and Book of Eclipse. They're really good against Kashtira, which is kind of like one of the best decks right now, and they're also really good against Purely because they're always trying to summon the Noir on your own turn with a trap card. Because summoning Noir on turn 1 is completely luck dependent because you need to sack the Delicious Memory. Unless you're skillful at the game, that's not gonna happen. But yeah, just because of one card, sometimes you might need Kaijus, and even though they do cover some ground, they're just low impact most of the time. But if you don't need your normal summon, you can definitely play Lava Golem instead because at least that's really high impact. And you can do the same thing with Kaiju monsters, but leave me alone, okay? And it's much easier to play around Sphere mode than Lava Golem because how are you playing around Lava Golem? By summoning only one monster? I mean, it's not gonna do anything against Purely in that situation, but Xyz Encore definitely will. And Xyz Encore is actually an extremely nasty card because you also get to use it against other decks. It's really good against Kashtira because if you're using it on a Rise Art, you're detaching materials first, they go to the banished, you don't revive any of them, and then you bounce back their Rise Art. But more about Xyz Encore later on. You want to know the cool thing about the cards that I just talked about? They're either quickly spell cards or actual monsters like Lava Golem and Sphere mode, so they don't really lose out to anti-spell. Because when you draw cards like Change of Heart, Mind Control, Enemy Controller, and stuff like that, it's not really gonna be doing anything. Yeah, Enemy Controller is a quickly spell, but it still plays into anti-spell because unfortunately you do need to control a monster to use it. Or else you can change the battle position of a monster, but that's not really the main purpose of the card. And I've already explained this in yesterday's video, but when there are meta trends, you really have to be aware of them and take them into consideration in your deck building and side decking patterns. Because in a world where anti-spell is in everyone's side deck, why play into it? Why make yourself vulnerable to such a powerful and popular and predictable card by playing cards that are just unusable against them? If anything, main deck those power normal spell cards and then side them out on game 2 and 3 when you're going second. That way you'll have way less normal spell cards, so if your opponent does draw anti-spell, then joke's on him. So he'll have a floodgate that does pretty much nothing against you because you replaced your normal spell cards with either quickly spells, Kaijus, Lava Golem, or hand traps. And if you can break his board, he's going to be screwed because his follow-up is going to be just way worse because he's now under his own anti-spell. And sometimes you don't even need to rely on back removal to out certain cards because you can just simplify the game state. So for example, at the moment, a clever strategy in Unchained is actually converting into a trap-heavy deck. They're playing spicy traps like Trap Tracks in order to throw out any normal trap card the same way Trap Trick does. But they're destroying a monster in the process, so they're either summoning Abominable, Unchained Soul and destroying a card, or, I don't know, Sharvara and get some advantage. And they can also fetch these trap cards with triple tactic thrust, so watch out when you hand trap them. So this means that not only do they have anti-spell to block your normal trap cards, but they also have access to trap cards to block your monsters. The good news is, since they're adding so many trap cards into their deck, if you can actually play a lot of hand traps to stop their main line of play, they might just have no more gas. So they will likely pass turn on like only trap cards and pretty much nothing else, and you can win the simplified game state game. Unless your opponent has like an IQ of 10 billion and plays perfectly through it, but that's another story for another day. You not only have to be good, but you also have to be like really good because you need to draw like the perfect hand. At this point, it must be nice, what can I say? But yeah, back to Xyzon Core. So I said that it was really good against a bunch of decks including Purely and Kashtira, but that's not all. Let's say you are an Unchained player and you are playing Xyzon Core, you are actually really afraid of Abyss Dweller, but at least you can actually out it with Xyzon Core. You have turn player priority on draw phase, so you can actually bounce it back, and even if your opponent has Solemn Judgment and Anti-Spell, it doesn't change anything. So one single card plays around so much. See, advice like this is why you have to smash the like and subscribe button. But yeah, other cool hand traps that you probably have to consider at least for the side deck would be Skullmeister and Retaliating Sea. They are pretty nice right now because Skullmeister negates card effects in the graveyard and not once per turn, and Retaliating Sea is pretty much like a shifter whenever your opponent activates a spell card that would try to special summon a monster. Extremely good against Branded Chimera, Purely, and also Runic-based strategies. Now it does summon itself on your own field, which is a good and a bad thing. It's a good thing because, hey, free material for a Synchro Fusion Xyz or Link summon. And it's a bad thing because, well, first of all, it turns on the nasty effect of triple tactic thrust, but also because it can get banished by Fenrir on the resolution. And Fenrir is also another one of the extremely good tech cards that you should be playing potentially in your deck right now. Regardless of the deck that you're playing, 3 Fenrir is actually really nice. Good going first, second, whatever, it's pretty much like the new Pancratops at this point, but main deck worthy. Now, Floodgates are not super generic, and also they're kind of like tech cards, so not really worth going over. But if your deck can play Goes and Match, or There Can Only Be One, or Skill Drain, or Summon Limit in the side, you should play them. Not all of them, obviously, but maybe 3 copies of the same Floodgate, or mix like 2 and 2. Now, if I continue for too long, I might end up diverging into completely random stuff. So I'll sum it up here and now. You really want to be main decking some book cards like Book of Moon and Book of Eclipse, maybe 3 of each, or 3 of only one of them, as well as triple tactic talents, potentially triple tactic thrust, and the generic hand traps that I talked about, so Ash, Imperm, and Nibiru. And then your side deck would be more specific and more aggressive blowouts. So your main deck should be somewhat generic and safe, while your side deck should be way more aggressive and risky. So obviously there's always exceptions to every rule, and also every deck behaves differently and adapts itself differently to side decking. For example, the Runic Sprite deck doesn't really have too much wiggle room for side decking, so sometimes it only sides like 3 cards. But yeah, again, I've got so much to say about, hand traps, board breakers, techs, staples, etc. I'll just stay until tomorrow morning if I keep going. So with that said, I'll say it's enough for today's video. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe as always, and I'll see you guys very, very soon. Peace.